Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me this evening. This evening, with it being the end of the year, I thought I would end on something perhaps a little frivolous. So do please indulge me. I will be talking about one of my childhood heroes, Captain James T Kirk, as you can see over my shoulder. If I get it the right way around, yeah, get over my shoulder, my little Starship Enterprise. Santa brought me that when I was about 8 or 9 years old. So, yeah, I grew up watching Captain Kirk. So this evening, I'm just going to do a little analysis, I think, of his personality type based on what you see. I'll before I go any further, I should say I will be referring to Captain Kirk as portrayed by William Shatner in the original series and the later movies. So I'm looking at the character, not the actor. Don't know anything about him other than what you hear on the internet and reading articles. But other than that, just really talking about the character himself. So there's a lot of stuff I had to look up. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know because I haven't really watched Star Trek in a very long time. So we do have some notes and things. So to begin with, James Tiberius Kirk, just to give a little bit of a background on him before I go into his personality type, because some of these things are going to show what I'm going to be talking about. So he was named James Tiberius Kirk. He was born, or rather will be born, in 2233. He's born on Earth in Iowa in America. And his dad, George, was a Starfleet officer, which seems to have influenced his early interest in Starfleet and space exploration. Now, when he was a child, he witnessed a massacre on a planet called Tarsus 5, I think it was. I can't remember. I forgot to write it down. But anyway, he witnesses a massacre where the governor executed about 4,000 of the colonists during a food shortage. Kirk, as a child, he was one of the survivors who later identified the governor as being the guilty party. So we already see something going on that's going to inform his character later on, something that might inform his willingness to self-sacrifice and to put others first and so on. But anyway, he joins Starfleet Academy at the age of 17. And during that time, he had to face what all the cadets have to face, a test called the Kobayashi Maru test, which is designed to be a no-win scenario. It's a no-win situation. So it's to test the cadets on their ability to face defeat and things like that. The young cadet, however, reprogrammed the simulator, meaning he could win. Now, he was faced with getting kicked out of the academy for doing that, but they recognized that this maybe showed ingenuity and original thinking, so instead he got a commendation. He later stated that the reason he did that was because he doesn't believe in no-win scenarios and that he doesn't like to lose. So, yeah, you could say that sounds a little narcissistic. However, if you remember, he's a teenager at the time, so we all think we're indestructible and things like that at that age. That being said, he did say it when he was about 50 years of age and he was an admiral, but maybe he was referring back to when he was a teenager. But anyway, after graduating the academy, he served as an ensign aboard the USS Republic. Later, as a lieutenant, sorry, this is all American. He serves aboard the USS Farragut under a Captain Garavik. Now, during that time, the Farragut encounters this cloud-like creature and half the crew are killed. Kirk blames himself because he hesitated to fire the phasers. He later finds out that it wouldn't have made any difference, and he's exonerated and so on after that. But that, again, might shape some of his leadership style. Now, he continues to rise through the ranks until at the early age of 32. That's very young. Apparently, it's the youngest in Starfleet history. But at the age of 32, he's promoted to captain, and he's given command of the USS Enterprise, previously under the command of Captain Christopher Pike. And he commands the Enterprise during its 5-year mission, okay, for those whole 5 years. And under his leadership during those 5 years, the Enterprise faces numerous threats. There's a lot of first contact with alien species, a lot of exploration, again, going where no one has gone before. But there's a lot of threats, including Klingons, Romulans, even godlike entities, as well as the discovering strange new worlds and so on. But it's during that 5-year mission he gets a reputation of being something of a maverick hero. He makes bold decisions. He even violates the rules when he thinks it's necessary. Things like the non-interference rule of the Prime Directive. But after the 5-year mission, he gets promoted to Admiral, and he serves as the Chief of Starfleet Operations back on Earth. He's also overseeing his old ship, the Enterprise's refit. What he finds is this does not suit him at all. He's living a life of boredom. He doesn't like desk work. And during a crisis in which this big alien probe thing, V'ger, approaches Earth, he takes a temporary reduction in rank back to captain, takes command of the newly refitted Enterprise, and saves the day in the motion picture. After that, he goes back to being an admiral. He's overseeing cadets and things like that, and in training in the academy and so on. And during an inspection of a training cruise, he's attacked by a former enemy that he originally confronted during the 5-year mission, Khan Noonien Singh. And during that time, his friend and first officer, Spock, dies. Okay. On return back to the starbase and so on, apparently he's supposed to go and bring the body back to Vulcan and so on. So him and senior members of his crew ask for permission to go back to the planet Genesis, where Spock's body was resting. And they're told, no, it's off limits, and they're certainly not allowed the Enterprise back. It's damaged, it's in poor state, and it's also an old ship, so they're going to decommission it. Kirk, however, again taking matters into his own hands, him and senior members of his crew steal the Enterprise to retrieve their friend's body. Unfortunately, reaching there, of course, it wouldn't be much of a movie unless there was a lot of drama and intrigue and adventure. As they reach the Genesis planet, they're hijacked, ambushed by a Klingon bird of prey. They are quickly overpowered, and he has to set the self-destruct. He blows up his ship. He blows up the Enterprise, commandeers the Klingon vessel, and returns Spock back to the planet Vulcan, where apparently he's now miraculously alive. But sure, there you go. Why wouldn't he be? On the way back from Vulcan to Earth, another sequel, they encounter this probe that is destroying the Earth. So they have to go back to 20th century Earth, pick up a few humpbacked whales, and bring them back to the future so that they can communicate with the probe that is destroying the Earth, which they do, okay? Now, having saved the Earth, Kirk and his crew are still facing court-martial. However, due to their actions, all of the charges are dropped except one. The sole charge of disobeying direct orders is aimed solely at Kirk, and he is demoted to the rank of captain and given command of the newly commissioned Enterprise 1701-A. He continues to command this ship until 2293, where we see him successfully foil an assassination attempt on a peace treaty that's being negotiated between the Federation and the Klingons. The ship is also, as I say, decommissioned that year, which suggests that it wasn't a new ship. It is possible. I don't know. There's a lot of different ideas out there, but it is possible that it was an older ship. It was a Constitution-class ship, which was refitted the same as the original Enterprise was, and then it was just recommissioned. So chances are it was a ship already with a history. Now, post-retirement, Kirk struggles with civilian life. He reflects on a life of duty, self-sacrifice, only to live in an empty house. He's no partner, he's no family, and he has pretty much nothing to do. He has no purpose and he has no drive. But in 2293, he's invited, along with a few other members of his former crew, to the maiden voyage of the Enterprise B. And it's during this that they have to rescue a ship that's caught in some energy ribbon, and he is lost and presumed dead. Thing is, though, he's not really dead, because again, it wouldn't be much of a movie. He's not really dead. He is caught in what's known as the Nexus, and this is a timeless realm. and this preserves him. It's like this instant moment of time is always within that nexus. You can live out every fantasy that you want. If you think about it, it's actually a narcissist's dream, really. But anyway, while in the nexus, he is found by a Captain Jean-Luc Picard. He recruits Kirk's help against a renegade scientist named Soren. And it's during that confrontation he is mortally wounded on a planet called Viridian 3. He dies at the age of, due to being trapped in the Nexus for all that time, he dies at the age of 138. So that is James T. Kirk. That's his life, okay? I'm sure there's a lot more I could have added. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff in the canon that might explain a few things and so on, but that's as much as I want to go into. So that's his life. So let's look at him, but we're going to look at him through the 5-factor model of personality, okay? And within the 5-factor model, there are 5 broad dimensions, okay? And they are, there's openness to experience, there's conscientiousness, there's extraversion, agreeableness, and there is neuroticism. And each of these traits exists on a continuum, okay? And I would like to say that this analysis of him is, first of all, he's a fictional character, but it is very amateurly based on his behaviors as depicted in the TV series and the movies, as well as the decisions that he makes, the reasons behind those decisions, and the relationships he has with his crew members and with other people as they come and go. Okay, so first of all, looking at openness to experience. James Kirk would be high in openness to experience. And the openness to experience would be a trait that reflects maybe a person's imagination. It's their appreciation for things like art, poetry, things like that. There's curiosity, there's emotional depth, but there's also a willingness to embrace new ideas, new information, even things that might go against maybe conventional experiences. Things that you imagine, well, I imagine anyway, would be pretty necessary to command a starship in the unknown. Okay, so he's open to experience. He is imaginative, he's adventurous, he's open to new ideas, he will listen to his crew, listen to what they all have to say, and then come up with a decision. We see him being curious and willing to learn about alien cultures. We can also see him being philosophical about humanity, his own as well as humanity's place in the universe. We see as well this passion for exploration. We see adaptability. We see a willingness. We see a willingness to learn new things, okay? If you think about it, again, being a captain of a starship that's out exploring space, you know, seeking out new life and new civilizations, okay, and boldly going where no one's gone before. But what we also see with that openness to experience, we see when he reprogrammed that test so that he could win it, we see innovation, okay? He's good at problem solving. He's creative when it comes to problem solving. There can be a rejection of rigid norms. So he can be, as I say, quite flexible. But we also see humility. He is open to changing his mind. If he sees he's wrong, if he gets new information, if one of the crew points something out, something can't be done, or maybe it has to go about it a different way. He will even challenge his own preconceptions about things. But in his personal life, if you think of, you know, back in the 60s, the TV series, he was kissing alien women every other week, you know, things like that. But we also see him, even in the original TV series, quoting Shakespeare, Paradise Lost, things like that. So we can see a sensitivity there as well, an appreciation for the beautiful things in life, it's like art and things like that. We also see but we can still start that sentence again. We can also see like a rigidity because he will resist ideas that might threaten certain values, things like free will and so on like that. You see this even in the original 60s TV series. There's an episode where There's this computer, the Return of the Archons. So he will resist some alien cultures, things that are going to inflict on his values and so on. But to sum it up with the openness, he's intellectually curious. And he would be an ideal explorer. And he also thrives on things like novelty. He likes new things. He likes finding out new things. Now, moving on to the next trait, and that would be conscientiousness. Now, high levels of conscientiousness, I should need to take a drink here. Hold on a second. I keep on saying, I bet you people wish you were watching someone that really has it all together and is slick and knows exactly what they're doing. Yeah, sure. You got me. There you go. Anyway, high levels of conscientiousness can indicate things like persistence, sense of duty. Lower levels might suggest things like being overly flexible over structure and things like that, and procedures, and sometimes even impulsivity. Okay. But high levels, and where we see Kirk, he would be moderate to high. We would see self-discipline, organization, and he's dependable. Okay. This makes him a highly competent leader. He's very self-disciplined. And even when you see crises that are in combat and things like that, there's still a lot of self-discipline. So he's highly dutiful. He's achievement orientated. He worked his way up through the ranks very quickly. He also has a very strong sense of responsibility, not just to Starfleet, but to his crew. Okay. Where it tends to drop off a bit is where we would see an impulsiveness and a willingness to bend rules, which might sometimes undermine that sense of duty. Okay. Sometimes it's like the end justifies the means. Okay. So there is a strong sense of duty. There's occasional rule breaking. There's high achievement, which shows aptitude, reliability. And as he was able to command the Enterprise through a lot of different crises, you often saw him prioritizing crew safety and mission success, sometimes even above his own safety and things like that. With the impulsiveness, again, he has broken the Prime Directive on more than one occasion. He even stole and destroyed the Enterprise in his search for his friend Spock. So he will break the rules if he thinks it's necessary. And this can indicate a lower sense of duty in favor of maybe his own sense of morality. Okay. And this can create something of what I mentioned earlier, as was described, maybe that maverick style of leadership. So again, he can be conscientious in ends, but maybe flexible in the means. Sometimes the end, as I say, justifies the means. Another aspect of where the conscientiousness lowers would be what you might see in a chaotic personal life. So you see a string of failed relationships. You see strained family ties. You also see a reluctance for desk jobs. When he finally reaches the rank of admiral, it's really not what he wants. It's not what he expected. It's not what he wants. And he is really not happy in that role. Okay. That's when you see the sense of duty start to diminish a bit. Moving on, we've got extraversion. Now, this would measure sociability, its assertiveness, levels of energy, looking for, or maybe a preference, if you will, for things like stimulation from external sources. Okay, so again, that's the being sociable. So people who are highly extroverted would be outgoing rather. They would be dominant in social settings. They would be energized by the people around them. And what we see with Kirk, who is high in extroversion, he would thrive in high stakes situations and leadership environments. He can be outgoing, he's assertive, he enjoys his leadership role. He can also be charismatic. And with his charisma, I'm just thinking, with his charisma, there's the charisma, the consistency, and even his warmth. This draws loyalty from his fellow crew members. He always gets the best from his crew. he draws this loyalty from them because he's loyal to them. Again, going back to the consistency and things like that, and the care for them, to always make sure they're safe and to make sure they get home okay. You see this as well, and the very deep bonds that he forms with two of his other crewmates, as First Officer Spock, who's half Vulcan, and Dr. Leonard McCoy, who yeah, form this kind of a triad, if you will, throughout the original TV series. Anyway, as a diplomat, when he's negotiating, such as I'm thinking of the movie The Undiscovered Country, when he's negotiating with the Klingons, he can push for peace, and he's trying to solve the mysteries. He's trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, and he's trying to protect even the Klingons, even though they put him in this icy prison and stuff. He's doing all this despite his personal grudges, despite his personal feelings about the Klingons, and especially after the death of his son. Okay. So he can be bold. He would be action orientated. He will lead away missions, landing parties, which apparently is supposed to be against Starfleet regulations. Captain's all supposed to stay on the ship, make sure they're safe and all that. They're supposed to be the most important person. He leads the away missions. He goes down. He beams down to the planets and so on. And this could reflect a need for excitement and stimulation, as much as making sure everybody else is safe. He can form, again, because of the charisma, he can form quick bonds. He makes friends. He forms alliances, relationships very quickly. I mentioned earlier in the original TV series, he's kissing somebody every other episode. So there's a lot of romantic entanglements. But we also see the excitement seeking as well in one of the movies where he's climbing a mountain, free climbing a mountain as well, while poor Dr. McCoy's heart's breaking because he thinks he could fall at any moment. So what we see is recklessness and risk-taking. Thing is, though, he would be reckless and risk-taking with himself, not with his crew or the people he is responsible for. So there we see a differentiation, if that's the right word there. Moving on to the next one, we've got agreeableness. And this thing, if you're in a position of responsibility, if you're in a position of command, if you have to go into combat every now and again, fire torpedoes and things like that, you really can't be far too agreeable. And with James Kirk, what we see is he can be moderate to low. Okay, so he's not high in agreeableness. He can be compassionate and he's loyal, but he can also, to his crew and to his friends and allies and so on, but he can also be confrontational. But what we can also see is a manipulative side of him whenever it's needed. He's able to outwit his enemies. Sometimes he will even use their own strengths against them. And we can see him prioritize the mission success, even if that's just getting his crew back or getting them home safely or getting the ship out of danger or whatever. We will see him prioritize things like that over harmony. Sometimes this is even clashing with authority figures, or when he's outgunned and outmaneuvered and, superior enemy forces and stuff like that. When it comes to the agreeableness, again, bringing out that loyalty in his crew, he is deeply loyal. He's also empathetic towards his crew. He can clash with them. He can be stern. One of my favorite lines as a kid, I always remember, and I have no idea what age I was when the first time I heard this. I've seen the episode a few times since. One of my favorite lines is when he was given an order and the crew were saying, yeah, but this, yeah, but that, and yeah, but the other thing. And his response was, that was not a request, mister. So yeah, he can be confrontational when he needs to be. But he even clashes with authority, even as you see, when he defies direct orders from superiors within Starfleet. So that can show like a low compliance in some situations. Again, sometimes it's his own sense of morality above whatever the orders or whatever the actual mission happens to be. This sometimes has earned him this what would you call it? describing his diplomacy levels as like cowboy diplomacy. It's like he shoots from the hip. So again, we can see that he can sometimes be impulsive, but it also shows he's quick at thinking on his feet. Okay. Now, moving on to the last one, and that is neuroticism. And with neuroticism, what we see is emotional stability. There's vulnerability to stress, anxiety, negative emotions, things like that. Not liking uncomfortable feelings. Okay. Um, so people who score low in neuroticism would be resilient, they would be calm under pressure, and they would tend to be optimistic. Okay. And Kirk would be low in neuroticism. So what we often see is sometimes we see the dramatic overreacting in the 1960s and so on, but generally he is calm under pressure. He's resilient in the face of loss. He can be optimistic. He tries to create opportunities for success and things like that to achieve the mission, things like that. He rarely shows emotional instability, even despite traumatic experiences, such as crew fatalities. There is a line in one of the episodes where he talks about, or rather, Dr. McCoy tells him about, I know what it hits you like, I know what it feels like when you lose a crew member. So there is a high sensitivity there, but he doesn't really show the emotional instability. Even the loss of a son, okay, it was an estranged relationship. He never got to see the young lad as he was growing up. Okay, the mother had taken him and raised him. He kept out of the way as per her request. But the loss of the son, as painful as that was for him, he remained committed to doing whatever it was he had to do. So he doesn't really dwell on things like guilt or fear. Instead, he uses these things, he channels them into action somehow. And again, maybe this is the optimism in him. Um, I'm just thinking another way of looking at that is when he died in the movie Generations, his last words were, "It was fun," you know, um, just to be in action one more time and to help a future captain of a future enterprise. Um, but that stability would underpin his not just his character, but his leadership as well. Often, I think maybe masking deeper vulnerabilities when you see little moments of introspection, little things comes up, like he says one time about cheating on the no-win situation. He has never really faced failure, things like that. Um, but anyway, overall, I would say that James T. Kirk was a bold, innovative leader whose high openness and his extraversion and his loyalty and his sense of duty would drive his sense of exploration to find out new things and to see new things and to always do the best thing for his crew and so on. Being moderately conscientious, and agreeableness will allow for pragmatic rule bending. Okay, again, if he thinks the end justifies the means, but it's all, if you will, this low sense of neuroticism makes him steadfast. It makes him brave. It makes him courageous as well. And I think that makes him quite an iconic character. Okay, and makes him quite dependable in a very unpredictable job that he was in. Okay, so that is me waffling on about James T. Kirk. Okay, again, thank you for allowing me to indulge myself. Um, there are other things I could have talked about because Chris Pine has now played the role as well. He brings something new to the role. He's actually quite good, though I can't see how someone who comes out of the academy a fortnight later is suddenly a captain. But other than that, whatever. There's a guy playing the role currently on the TV series Strange New Worlds. Haven't seen him, so I don't really know what he's like. But the William Shatner Kirk is the one that I grew up with. So I am going to go back to the very beginning, and I'm going to see, let me see if I can do this pop-out, and I will answer questions as they come up. So Where do you go? Jane said, oh, I don't think this is the beginning. I'm pretty sure. Oh, top chat. No, let me see. I want to see all chat. That's better. Let's get back to the beginning. Oh, I think this is the beginning. Khan! Yeah, absolutely. Khan, I think, is an amazing villain. And it's funny, I saw this internet meme recently where it's just a picture of Kirk and Khan. And Kirk is saying, are you really telling me that you memorized every line of Moby Dick and you still don't get the point of the story? Just Khan with this blank look on his face. So yeah, I thought that was quite funny. But Khan is a brilliant villain, brilliant, iconic villain. So where did we get to? Evangelist Way says, being a womanizer was marketing to make people watch. He was a movie star, remember? Yeah, absolutely. Could take a joke. It was very tongue-in-cheek. 60s were different. He would be considered creepy now. I heard someone say once, I thought this was quite witty and amusing. Someone said the difference between romantic and creepy is whether or not you like the person, so who knows? I thought it was witty. Anyway, so where did we get to? But yes, they were very different times back then. So yeah. So where do we get to? Any questions? Remember, little question marks make it easier for me to find. Sean says he should have met a nice lady and settled down. Well, yeah, and this is the thing. It's not that he didn't have the chance. Apparently, there were plenty of opportunities over the years. I mean, Carol Marcus that he had the son with, he went off back to Starfleet instead of settling down. And then when you see him in the movie Generations, he had retired. He was living in a house, and I can't remember the woman's name, but there was a woman who had left him because he had said he was yet again going back to Starfleet and so on. So yeah, and he is reflecting on that a lifetime of service gave him nothing but an empty house. He had no wife, he had no kids, he had no family. I would suggest he was lonely. So yeah, maybe he should have met a nice lady and settled down. Carmen Miranda's asking, do you think Darren is a Trekkie? Darren used to be a really big Trekkie when I was younger. Absolutely. I loved it. I grew up watching Star Trek, So I used to be, yeah, not so much anymore. Maybe it's because I've grown up a little bit. Who knows? Well, I'll grow up someday, but not so much. I don't really watch any of the new stuff. There isn't really, I don't know, it just doesn't feel the same. I don't know, maybe it's just for a whole new audience or something, but it just doesn't feel the same way. Says, I loved Star Trek as a child. I used to brush my hair to pretend to speak on their walkie-talkies with my brother. Run down the street in school grounds with my friends playing Star Trek. Yeah, we used to do that too. Absolutely. Used to pretend to flip open our little communicators and so on. People Show says, this is like a Christmas present. Thank you. Oh, it's good. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I made sense. I know I do tend to waffle away, and I just come out sometimes with random things and, lose the thread of my thoughts sometimes. But no, I hope you enjoyed this. So where do we get to? Also, yeah, I mean, people saying about the 60s and about the womanizing and so on. You have to remember the way programs were made back then, apart from anything else. Remember, he's promoted to captain at the age of 32, okay? Back then, the hero was always this young, good-looking American guy. That was pretty much the way it was back then, okay? If you imagine if they'd have cast Patrick Stewart as Captain Kirk back in the 1960s, would it have endured? By the time the Next Generation came on, I think the audience were ready for a more mature, seasoned kind of duty-bound, no-nonsense kind of captain. But back then, it was a different era. So where do we get to? Yeah, he cared about the greater good and wanted to save people from danger and evil. It was a great show. The humor in it was wonderful. I think the best humor in it has always got to be between McCoy and Spock. That has always got to be. There's just, it's some of those lines were just, and those little moments were just brilliantly written and brilliantly acted. Yeah, I love those great little moments. Let me get to. Oh, I've just jumped, so need to get back to it. Let me see. Well, good enough. Circle. Can't. It's the thing. Sometimes I'm going to jump in on something, but I'm afraid I'm going to jump in on someone's conversation. So, oh, Carmen Miranda says she still watches it now. It's on Legend, 6 p.m. weekdays. Yeah, I've noticed on Netflix they have it as well. And what they've done as well is they have updated a lot of the special effects. And I've watched it. I've watched some of them with the updated effects, and it is quite good. It's interesting, but nothing wrong with the new effects. I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with adding new effects to things. Remember, the technology back then was very, very different. But I just think there's something of a charm from seeing the old special effects and things like that. You know, polystyrene boulders being thrown at people and things like that. Yeah, it's good stuff. Where do we get to? Jane says that's why he needed Spock and Bones to balance out his tendency to sacrifice the means for the end. I think I mentioned this previously on a live stream at one point, but I think it's very interesting when you look at the dynamic between the crew and how Kirk would make his decisions. Now, sometimes he is impulsive and sometimes he is going to be reckless. Sometimes he is going to go on his gut feeling and things like that. But often what you hear, if you think of the Freudian concept of the id and the superego, now the id's the instant gratification, the libido, things like that. The superego is the at its lowest form, I suppose it would be the conscience, all the reasons why we shouldn't, all the reasons why it's a bad idea. And if you watch the original series, you'll see they're faced with a dilemma. And you would have Dr. McCoy being very, very impetuous and very instant gratification. You know, damn it, Jim, we got to do something, you know, that sort of thing. On the other side of that, you would have the engineer Scott, who would be saying things like, you know, it wasn't designed for this kind of thing. You can't change the laws of physics. She's going to fly apart at the seams, you know. And in between the two, you have cold, rational, logical Spock. Okay. And this is maybe what Freud would describe as the ego. Cold, rational, logical Spock would listen to them both and would maybe come up with a compromise, would maybe side with one or the other or come up with an alternative, whatever. And Kirk would listen to them and then he would make his decision. Sometimes he would go with one of them, sometimes he would go with Spock, sometimes he would just come up with his own idea, but it would all be based on the information that was around him. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know if that was by accident or by design, but I think it's very, very clever. Okay. So I told you, I waffle, don't I? Some fun. I loved Spock, loved the friendship between Kirk and Spock, taught me a lot. Yeah, I think it was what you might describe as maybe the first bromance. Isn't that what they call it? Yeah. There's a deep loyalty, there's a deep seated friendship there. Absolutely. They're more than just crewmates. They just more than work together. There's a dynamic there, which is really, really nice. Where do we get to? Very happy Monday. Bones. Yes, Dr. McCoy, Bones. Does anyone want to hear my impersonation of both Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy? Okay, take a drink first. Okay, here goes. Bones. Jim. How was that? Let me get to. Let me see. Chin says, very common trope, the hero must never have a family or steady love because they become an Achilles heel. They wouldn't be able to prioritize their mission and their team. That's interesting, Gian. That's very interesting. I think you might well be right. giving them a foot in the real world, if you will, giving them a sense of stability. Yeah. It also means, again, I'm thinking way back in the 60s as well, if they have a family at home and things like that, they're not going to be kissing aliens every other week. But yeah, it gives them, not having that foot in the real world, not having that commitment, not having that family and so on. Yeah, it makes them maybe a bit more self-sacrificing, things like that. So yeah, okay. Let me see. Oh, it's just jumped again. Let me get back to where I was. Okay. Dr. Patrick Lockwood says, ballpark the percentile scores. Okay. Anybody, if you're interested in listening to someone who really does know what they're talking about when it comes to things like mental health and psychiatry, I would encourage you to tune in to Dr. Patrick Lockwood. In the UK time, it's on Saturday night about, I think it's about 11 o'clock or something like that. He does a live stream. And I think in America where he is, it might be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But anyway, very, very interesting. And anyway, there's a whole backlog of live streams there with really, really good information, talking about different things. And he talks about things in a very common sense way. So it's good to have you here, Patrick. I'm glad you were able to join me. Where did it get to? Yeah. No, Evangelist Way, it was good to have you here. Very interesting discussion about Kirk. Yeah, it's good to have you here. I'm glad you're here. You can pick up on the rest of it, sure. Oh, my favorite episode of the original series would be, I guess, Space Seed, and that's the one that has Khan in it, because that is the precursor to what comes in the Wrath of Khan. So that would be my favorite series. And there's a wonderful line at the end of it, where they quote Paradise Lost, and it's not even so much a quote, it's just as Khan's being led away, they're going to maroon them on the planet. He turns to Kirk and he says, have you ever read Milton? And Kirk knows exactly what he's talking about. And the line is, it is better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. And that's the mindset of Khan, the person that he was up against. So that would be my favorite episode. I think it's Space Seed. I think that's what it's called. Let me get to... Where do we get to? Yeah, Jane is saying Kirk subverted expectations because we tend to think of that boldness and womanizing as going along with someone neurotic and extremely selfish. Yeah, I guess it does. Yeah, it does subvert the expectations. You would see a confidence in him. You would sometimes, occasionally, you would see an arrogance. Sometimes that comes out. But again, I think there's enough humility in the character when he realizes he is wrong, or he is open to new information. He has got something wrong. There is a better way of doing something, and so on. And he will, as I say, he will listen to the people around him. So again, yeah, that would subvert that idea of someone who is extremely selfish and narcissistic and just loves the idea of command and being in charge. So where do we get to? The game says really enjoyable, thank you. That's good. Where do we get to? It's just jumped again. Oh, I've just jumped back to where I was. That's what it was. Tinsella says, thanks for a great video. Oh, thanks for joining me. I'm glad you found it interesting. As I say, I'm just being a bit frivolous. Very happy Mondays. Thank you for the waffles, happiness and joy in 2026. Peace to all in the universe. Very happy Mondays. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That is very kind. That is very generous. And as always, I will thank you on behalf of Freud, for he and I will both be indulging in sausages this week. We both like our sausages. So thank you very much. Amanda Roberts says Spock would be a Virgo, Kirk an Aquarian. I have no idea. I have no idea. I know nothing about star signs. I only found out a couple of years ago that apparently I'm a Capricorn. I've maybe that's changed. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I'm a Capricorn. I've no idea about star signs, so I'm sorry about that. Where do we get to? Where do we get to? I keep on jumping. Every time I'm about to read something, it just jumps, and I have to go back and find out where I was. Where did we get to? Oh, right. I've got back to where it was. Okay. Right. Maybe it was Shatner's betrayal, but I still think Kirk was a narcissist. I think there were probably narcissistic traits, as I say, when you could put this to him just being young. He was a teenager, saying things like he doesn't like to lose, he doesn't believe in no-win situations, things like that, which does sound quite narcissistic. And believing he was entitled to cheat, if you will. So you could put that down to just being young and foolish. But the thing is, he said it when he was an admiral. I think he's about 50 years of age when he says it. So the thing is, if it was narcissism, what you see, someone who is willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good, who will put his crew first, who will put other people first. You will see that sense of duty. I suppose at a strain, you could maybe push. You don't really see this. I can't remember ever seeing this in even any of the movies, but you could maybe at a push say maybe obsessive compulsive personality, where everything is about order and everything has to be done a certain way and so on. But that would be a real push. I don't really see any evidence of that. Oh, it just jumped again. And Jane says, Darren, I think you'd enjoy overly sarcastic productions, entire series on tropes, particularly. Thank you very much for that, Jane. I might have a look at that. Thank you for the recommendation. I like listening to podcasts, and I watch some YouTube channels where they do talk about the writing of certain things and what's behind it, and how a lot of times you find scripts are recycled, for different shows. You would see this. I don't know if anyone's aware of it, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was a program, Blake 7. Looking at that with hindsight now and listening to some of the podcasts, you can see that some of the episodes were probably more than likely Doctor Who episodes that were just never used. Okay, so yeah, it's interesting when you see those sorts of things. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Overly sarcastic productions. I will go back and have a look at this so that I will remember that. Carmen Miranda says Spock is half human, which gives his character more interest. Well, this is another thing that story writers like. They like conflict. Okay. And what you find with Spock, even back in the 60s, is there's supposed to be this conflict between the Vulcan half and the human half. Okay. You see that sometimes, but you don't see it all the time. It was something else that was, I would say, toyed with, but they never went anywhere with it. In the 90s Voyager series, where you had half of the crew were Starfleet and half of the crew were Maquis. I think that's what they were called, if I remember right. Again, there was supposed to be a sense of conflict, because conflict creates drama, creates stories, and so on. But again, that was very quickly dropped. The crew were very much unified. So where do we get to? His pointy little ears. So it's hard enough assigning NPD to real people, impossible and fictional people. Good fun though, I guess. Well, I guess it's easy to recognize certain. This is the thing. This is the thing about characters, more so in TV shows rather than movies, unless it's like a series of movies. You might have someone who might have a particular personality type. Very rarely is it consistent. Sometimes it will change depending on the plot or depending on who wrote the episode, who might not understand the characters, might not understand the story. So sometimes you don't always see that. And I think it's interesting when you see when you're first seeing Hannibal Lecter, for instance. I think it was Brian Cox. I might be wrong. You first portray him, and you see someone who is very psychopathic. He's really really good in that movie Manhunter. And then Anthony Hopkins takes over, and again he makes the role his own. He's very very good in Silence of the Lambs. But the more he portrays Hannibal Lecter, the less you're seeing a psychopath, the more you're seeing some kind of mad crazy supervillain that can command animals with his brain and stuff. So you see this inconsistency, and it's not to say that characters don't change. They are going to have a character arc and things like that. They're going to grow, they're going to learn and things like that. But if it's like a personality type, you very rarely see a consistency. So where do we get to? Oh, just jumped. Okay, I think I'm coming towards the end. Oh, so you haven't, somebody, was it Wingsley and Jane? You're having trouble with autocorrect. I have trouble with autocorrect as well. When I type my name in to a text or an email, my autocorrect brings up Fatten. How the hell does it do that? Really? There's an N at both the end of them, and that's about it. But it's strange anyway. So yeah. Okay, thanks, Darren and chat. We need to be careful with the boxes we put each other in. Yeah, we do. I always say, I can't diagnose anybody. I don't know if anybody in the audience can. I think it's not just looking at a behavior. Sometimes it's just recognizing repeated patterns of behavior and the impact that has on you. Okay, that's something to maybe focus on. Oh, how about the series Monk? I have not seen all of that, but I have seen a few episodes. And that's a guy who seems to be highly neurotic, obsessive compulsive disorder. There seems to be other things going on with him, which interestingly he seems to use to be able to solve mysteries and crimes and things like that. But I haven't watched a lot of it. I think I've watched about 3 or 4 episodes. But anyway, where did I get to? You're welcome, Tim. And if most of your brain is still working, you're not too old. Well, I'd say at least 30% of mine's working, so that's okay. So, Lydia, I think that's what it says. Again, I'm not very good at pronouncing people's names when I can hardly see them in the first place. But anyway, thank you, everyone. Happy New Year, Darren, Freud, and everyone. And a very happy New Year to you as well. Let me see where to get to. Dollar's mom says, oh, it's talking to Wingsley saying Flexer. reading Proust this coming year with Dr. Paul Taylor and Readers of the Lost Art. Well, on that note, I am going to bring this to a close, but I'm going to bring to a close with this. If you're free on the 10th of January at 4 p.m. UK time, I will be discussing the H.G. Wells classic book, one of my favorite stories. I will be discussing The War of the Worlds. He has invited me and Richard Grannon onto his channel. We're going to be talking about The War of the Worlds. I will be talking about it from my perspective, my first introduction to it as a child, the passion I have for the story, and the disappointment I have in so many different versions of it that are made into movies and so on. I'll be talking about the human need for adventure and things like that. Why the book still stands up today, in spite of when it was set back in Victorian times, and how, from my perspective, it's a book that fascinates me. I always get something new from it whenever I revisit it. But it terrifies me as well, and it's that part of us that looks at things like scary movies, scary stories, things like that. A part of us that, as much as we don't like being frightened whenever we're reading it or we're watching it in the movie, things like that passion we have for fear, if you will, that controlled fear, maybe because it's from a distance, if you will. It's set in fantasy. So yeah, 10th of January, the three of us will be discussing The War of the Worlds, why it still stands up today, why we're still drawn to it, what makes it such an absolutely fantastic story. So your homework between now and then is to go and read The War of the Worlds, so you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, everybody, thank you for joining me again. Thank you for indulging me in waffling on about something I would like to talk about. At some point in the future, if anybody's interested, I might do the same with maybe another character. I haven't done a character analysis of anybody in a long time. I've done people. The last one I talked about was, I think it was the Riddler in the Batman movie, and that's about maybe 3 years ago by now. And I talked about the Joker, the Joaquin Phoenix version of the Joker. I've talked about Negan from The Walking Dead. I haven't talked about fictional characters in a long time, so it was nice to do that this evening. I appreciate you all listening to me waffle. But anyway, between now and then, again, I will be hopefully back this week. I'm still on leave, but I'll try and get a video out this week anyway. Between now and then, I'm going to leave you all with a bit of homework, and that is to have a very happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. Okay, everybody, look after yourselves, take care, and I'll see you all again soon.